Hey everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for this video. A couple of days ago, someone in my Discord mentioned something about rivalries, and it just got me thinking about when I made a video 3 years ago of the best NHL rivals, and maybe I could revisit that video and redo it since it's been 3 years. There are rivalries that have died, there are new rivalries, so that probably is a video that I could revisit and remake. However, I thought maybe not more importantly, but on a different note, what rivalries specifically could be better? I'm talking about maybe rivalries that happened in the past decade that kind of faded away, or maybe even the past 2 or 3 decades that faded away. And then I started to make a list. I got really into it, and it just became too long. So this video could probably be 40 minutes, and we could analyze every single team, but that's not what we're going to do. This is going to be more of a community video where I'm going to read off or talk about maybe a handful of rivalries, and rivalries I think could be better for multiple reasons. And I'm wondering if you guys could leave your thoughts down below in the comment section and include any ones you thought I missed, or just add on to the list and give your own opinion of why whatever specific rivalry you're thinking of could be better. So I'm going to start off with one that maybe doesn't get the attention that it deserves. It's already a rivalry. It's between the New York Rangers and the New York Islanders. Two New York teams, and New Jersey, I know you're right next door. I'm not trying to leave you out on purpose or Devils fans, but the relationship between the Islanders and Rangers is a very interesting one, not even from a rivalry perspective, but from a trade perspective. If I'm not mistaken, recently they made their first trade in team history between each other, which is really mind-blowing just itself. So these two teams both have incredible history individually. They've had a rivalry just based on location, geography, for really ever since the Islanders came into existence. Obviously, the Rangers were there before the Islanders. So this is a rivalry that really has never gone away, but I feel like it's never been super strong. You look at the interprovincial or interstate rivalries like Edmonton and Calgary. That's an interprovincial rivalry that's been there forever, and it's had really big highs, and kind of some lows. I felt like earlier on in the I guess technically the last decade now, there really wasn't much there. Recently, that rivalry has really come to life, which is awesome. But as far as the New York teams, or around New York City teams, the Islanders and the Rangers are a rivalry that have been around, like I said, since the beginning of the Islanders franchise, but has never been strong in my opinion. They don't end up playing each other in the playoffs that much, and if there's one thing that births a rivalry or re-inflames a rivalry, it is the playoffs. We've seen that with Carolina recently and Washington. The Pittsburgh-Philadelphia series or rivalry has, I think they've probably played each other 4 times in the last 10 years in the playoffs, which is amazing. That's why they've done a couple of stadium games, series against each other. It's a really strong rivalry, and I think that when I think about the Rangers and when I think about the Islanders, these are two teams that could have one of the best rivalries in all of the NHL. I'm going to mention some other ones in here that are great as well, but there's a lot of potential here. I see so much potential for these two teams, and I hope they play each other in the playoffs soon. It's very possible with the way that things are structured now. With I'm not a fan of how the playoff format is structured currently, but there is a lot of potential for these two teams to meet. They just really haven't done it recently. So this is, I think personally, a really good example of a rivalry that could be better. Next on my list is the Detroit Red Wings and Colorado Avalanche. So these two teams, I would say, had my most favorite rivalry ever in the history of the NHL. These two teams met 2 times in the playoffs in the 90s, I believe, or maybe early 2000s. I'm going way back. I was, in high school at that point, so that's dating me quite far. So I can't name the specific years, but I do remember watching those series and just being absolutely glued to the TV. And regardless of the rivalry then, regardless of the winner or the loser, those were really important series for the NHL from a European player perspective. I really felt like those two series kind of gave us new respect as North Americans to European players. We saw European players play more like North American players, a harder, faster, harder hitting, physical type play. We really saw some feistiness from those European players. So that was kind of those two series were kind of a groundbreaking event for the NHL. Even it's overshadowed by a lot of other amazing series, but to me those two series were just unbelievable. And I mean, you have Patrick Roy fighting basically whoever Detroit put in nets. So it's one of the only series, I can't remember which year, but I went back and I watched it recently, and I've never really done that before. I find it hard to watch old games when I already know who won, but that's one that I could probably watch again and again and again. That's just how good of a series it was and how great of hockey it was. So that rivalry has unfortunately died, and it's no fault of Colorado. It's no fault of Detroit. It is completely situational, based on the fact that these two teams are not in the same conference anymore. Detroit moved to the East in 2010, I believe. So things are a bit different now. These two teams, you could say they still have a rivalry, but I just don't see it ever even really coming close to what it used to be. That's not saying that it can't happen. I just think it's unrealistic, but there's potential there for something better than it is right now, because right now it's nothing. So you have one of the best rivalries ever in the history of the NHL. Now you have nothing. So maybe if we just come up like 20%, I feel like maybe there's something there. We could create something from that rivalry even today. All right, next is the Montreal Canadiens, my favorite team, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is a rivalry that's been around for 100 years. It's had highs, it's had lows, but it's always 100% been there. Even more than the Rangers and Islanders, Montreal and Toronto. It doesn't matter if Toronto's really good and Montreal's really bad. Montreal can beat Toronto on any night, and vice versa. I remember when Montreal was really good and Toronto was really bad, and it didn't matter. Toronto would just always beat Montreal. It's just the way these two teams are. They just have a funky, weird relationship. And as good as that relationship is, or bad, if you want to look at it that way, it could be better. It could be way better. I feel like Montreal has a better rivalry with Boston. I think Toronto has a better rivalry with Boston. I would say even the Maple Leafs, because of Tavares, have a better rivalry with the Islanders than they do Montreal. There's always going to be hate between Montreal and Toronto, but it's not what it could be. Imagine if these two teams played, and I'm not even talking conference finals or second round, in the first round. Just if these two teams met in the first round, the magic that would unfold in that series, regardless of the winner. Obviously, Toronto would probably win, and unfortunately for Canadiens fans, but it would be great remove yourself from a Maple Leafs fan, remove yourself from a Canadiens fan, just as a hockey fan. That series would be absolutely incredible. It needs to happen. I don't want it to happen because I don't want the Maple Leafs fans to hold that over my head. But as a hockey fan, man, that series needs to happen. So that is 100% a series that I believe could be, or a rivalry that could be better. All right, speaking on Toronto and sticking with them, I want to talk a little bit about Ontario. Now, I did mention this rivalry before, an interprovincial rivalry. I think I mentioned it before. If I didn't, I thought it. But the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators. I will definitely say that some of the best series I've ever watched in the early 2000s, I believe it was, or maybe late 90s, was the Ottawa Senators versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. Some of my favorite series, because I didn't really have a dog in the fight. I was just watching it as a hockey fan. It was just really good hockey. And as two teams from the province of Ontario, there's always been a rivalry there, but kind of like Montreal and Toronto, it could be better. I remember the battle days between those two teams where it was just relentless hockey, and there was there was fights and there was hits, and it was just crazy. You don't really get that anymore. Toronto is on a high, Ottawa's kind of on a low right now, starting to make their way back up. So these two teams haven't really met each other at the same level. One's kind of always been a little bit higher than the other, at least in the past, I would say 15 years. So I think if Toronto fell a little bit, or even if they stayed where they were, Ottawa is going to be a competitive team in the next 5-10 years, whatever it is. 3, 8, I don't care. Pick whatever number you want. They're going to be competitive again, and they're going to be fun to watch. And I think that rivalry with Toronto could be reborn. And I think it could be one of the best series or rivalries in the entire NHL. Better than a Toronto Montreal, better than potentially a Montreal Boston, because that's kind of died down a little bit. So I see a lot of potential with this one. Let me know your thoughts on that. Okay, transitioning over to the West, I'm going to pick two teams that I would say have a lukewarm rivalry within the NHL, but between the two fan bases, it's always been pretty heated. I'm talking about the Chicago Blackhawks and the St. Louis Blues. They've met a couple of times in the playoffs. It's been great hockey. It's been amazing to see these two teams battle, but I think there's more there. I think if Chicago faced St. Louis 2 years in a row in the playoffs, I think that would be some of the best hockey, specifically on year 2, because we've got the history of year 1. If they saw each other back-to-back in playoffs, I really think that rivalry could be one of the best in current NHL, because these two teams fans really kind of already hate each other. I know St. Louis fans who live around Chicago and hate that they live there, and I know Chicago fans who live around St. Louis and hate that they live there. So there's a back and forth between these two fan bases, and it could be better. And as a hockey fan, I want to see it. All right, sticking with the West, let's go Vegas, Arizona, two desert teams. I think because of Vegas and their playoff success, fortunately and unfortunately, they have better rivals than Arizona. If you had have predicted who Vegas, the Golden Knights' rival would have been prior to them entering the NHL, it would have almost certainly been Arizona. I think there's still potential there. That's why they're on my list. I think it's just natural, based on division and based on geography, that they are a very safe bet for a future rivalry. Now, obviously, that gets a little bit complicated when Seattle comes in, and I think it is Arizona that's moving to the Central. But regardless, they're two desert teams, and they need to have a rivalry. I think they need to. But with Vegas's success in the playoffs, they've already have been gifted a rivalry between a couple of teams. I would say that they have a rivalry with Washington, although it's really kind of died down since obviously a couple of years have passed now. The Golden Knights' main rivalry, without question, like if you disagree, you're wrong. Like I don't even think there's an opinion here. It's just fact. The San Jose Sharks. The San Jose Vegas, because of all the drama that happened, regardless of what team you cheer for, regardless of whether you think that game that happened, and I know you know what game I'm talking about, whatever side you're on, it was incredible to watch. The ups, the downs on both sides, the drama. This is, I think, one of the most active rivalries in the NHL right now. So it kind of sucks that Arizona's kind of like, hey, what about me? Vegas, don't forget about me. Let's go. But it's just not there, and it's frustrating. So I think if we're looking at rivalries and what rivalries could be better, Arizona and Vegas have to be in there. They just have to. And that leads me to my next one. Just Arizona. Like, there's no other team I have to insert here. It's just Arizona. Who is Arizona's rival? Is it another expansion team that came out around the same time? I know they weren't an expansion team, but there were a couple of expansion teams that came out around there. So do you pick one of them and kind of consider Arizona a new team, even though they moved from Winnipeg? Or do you pick a couple of teams that are close to them? We'll push Vegas aside, but I mean, Dallas, even though Dallas really isn't that close, Colorado is right there. I guess it's right there. But there's really no team for Arizona to have a rivalry with. I just don't see. I mean, I guess you could probably argue that the Kings have a bit of a rivalry with Arizona, but still, it's wishy-washy. I don't know. Maybe I need to hear from Arizona fans from this, because admittedly I don't watch a lot of Coyotes games just because they're on really late. I live in Atlantic Canada, so sometimes those games start at almost midnight my time. So, but still, some feedback. Who should and who should Arizona's rival be? And last on this list, well, not last on my list, actually, there's about 10 other rivalries on this list that I could talk about, but the last one I'm going to talk about in this video, and hope that you guys contribute in the comments with some of yours. But my last one for this video is the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers, an interstate rival. Does it exist? It's kind of a hard question to answer. I think from the outside it does. I think prior to this year, even though this year's not over yet, prior to this season, I would argue that it did not exist at all, which is really unfortunate. However, we did see some life in that rivalry this season. I think because of the changes that Florida made in the offseason, because of how competitive Tampa is just every year, basically. These two teams really they both had strong teams. They both had strong horses on both sides, and they battled and they fought, and something was born. It might not be a full fire, but there's a spark there. And these two teams are going to play each other a lot. These two teams are going to be good for the coming 5 years. They're going to play each other a lot. They're almost certainly going to meet in the playoffs at some point, whether it's this year, if things work out, or if it's next year, whatever. They're almost certainly going to meet. And I think it's really important for hockey and the NHL to have a rivalry in that market. And I'm talking about a non-typical hockey market. Now, Tampa has done really well. They have an amazing fan base. It's very widespread, and they've been very successful. The Panthers, I can't really say the same about the Panthers, unfortunately. However, they've made some pretty big steps in the past couple of years, specifically in the last, I'd say, 16 months. So with the rise of the Panthers and the consistency of Tampa Bay, they're going to come to a point where they're probably floating a little bit like this in the standings and skill and whatever. So these two teams, I'm going to guess for the next 6 years, are going to build quite a strong rivalry. And that is just awesome for the state of Florida, number one. Number two, just general hockey fans like myself. And number three, from the NHL from a financial perspective. So look at my list. Disagree with any if you want down in the comment section. But I personally believe that all the rivalries that I named in this video could be better. And I think some inevitably will be better. Some probably not. But anyways, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and make sure you tell me some of the rivalries that you thought I missed out on or didn't include in the video. Maybe some sneakers in there that I'm not totally aware of. But anyways, let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Subscribe down below for more hockey talk, jersey talk, logo rankings, all that good stuff. Hope you guys are having an awesome day, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.